Chapter 256 Lost. Days flowed into one another, a seamless web of time where the sun rose and set with breathtaking regularity. The clouds, ever-changing, painted the sky in shades of dawn, dusk, and noon, marking the passage of each fleeting moment. Mornings gave way to afternoons, which melted into nights, and before it was truly felt, 2 months had quietly slipped away. The passage of time felt like the turning of a page, each day more agonizing than the other for those who waited for the light in their lives to return. A silhouette stood before the balcony, his figure shrouded in the soft glow of the setting sun. His gray eyes were filled with despair as he watched the delicate flowers slowly drift off the branches of the nearby trees. The spring breeze swirled around him, tousling his neck-length hair and sending a shiver down his spine. Life, he thought, was so fragile, so fleeting, slipping away before one even had a chance to hold on to it. He'd lost in life, Neil thought, recalling the past few months without Mia in it and how agonizing each day had been for him. Beside him, James and Liam stood in a heavy silence, their concern for him palpable. Liam, unable to bear the quiet any longer, finally broke the silence that had followed his question. "When do you plan to go see them, Neil?" His voice was soft but insistent. "The twins will be out of the incubator today. You can't continue to pretend they are not your children or that you don't know of their existence. They need you, and Mia wouldn't have wanted you to ignore them like this." "Mia wouldn't be. Mia is not here," Neil snapped, his fingers tightening around the balcony railings as he fought to control his emotions. The pain in his voice was raw and unfiltered. "Don't tell me what to do. If Mia wanted me to be with our children, she wouldn't have abandoned me like this." Liam felt his heart tighten at the sight of his friend's anguish. Neil's transformation over the past 2 months had been alarming. His once vibrant eyes were now sunken and hollow, his cheeks gaunt. His beard, left unshaved for months, had grown wild and unruly, and his hair, longer than it had ever been, hung in disheveled strands. He looked a decade older, his clothes hanging loosely on his lean frame as if he'd borrowed them from someone much larger. He'd spent all of his days in the hospital, not once stepping out to see the outside world or be the man he once used to be. For the 2 months and 3 weeks his children had been in the incubator, Neil had not gone to see them, nor even acknowledged them as his. Every time people brought them up, he changed the topic or left the place, as if the mere mention of them was taboo and a reminder of how he had failed his wife. Liam had made sure to always keep them out of his mouth whenever he was near Neil, but he couldn't anymore, not when the kids would be out of the glass and would need their parents. "Neil, you wouldn't want to miss this moment for the world. Mia wouldn't want you to miss this. Do this for her and be there for them." Neil cut him off by raising his hand for him to shut up. James placed a reassuring hand on Neil's shoulder, but the gesture was met with a flinch. "Xavier, we're just worried about you," he said gently. "We know this is hard, but you can't do this to yourself. The twins need their father." Neil's gaze remained fixed on the horizon, his heart aching with every breath. "I don't know how to be a father without her," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. Liam stepped closer, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You don't have to do it alone, Neil. We're here for you, but those babies need their dad just as much as you need them. Mia would be happy to know that you went to see them. You remember what happened the last time you told her you hadn't seen your children, don't you?" Neil's grip on the railing loosened slightly, the weight of his friend's words beginning to pierce through the haze of his grief. He remembered what had happened. Last month, his wife had fallen into a vegetative state where she would randomly open her eyes or make slight movements with her hands. He'd been so happy that she was improving, only to be told by the doctors that all her gestures were subconscious and that she wasn't aware of them. The doctors had encouraged him to talk to her more, saying it might help her recover faster. But the day he brought himself to talk to her about their children, her condition had worsened drastically. He told her that he hadn't gone to see them and that he would only do that once she woke up, but those words had been met with a response that knocked the soul out of him. He had sat beside her that day, his fingers lightly gripping hers as he talked to her, the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor providing a semblance of comfort. Suddenly, the familiar sounds changed when he told her about their children. A strange, guttural noise had escaped her throat, and the heart monitor's lines began to drop erratically before flattening entirely. Panic had surged through him, momentarily paralyzing him. He didn't know what to do, his mind racing with fear. Then, instinct took over. He jumped to his feet and screamed for the doctors while pressing the emergency button, his voice echoing through the sterile hallways. Within moments, the room flooded with medical personnel, their urgent movements a blur as they surrounded his wife, initiating life-saving measures. It had taken them hours to bring her back, and since then, the doctors had limited his time with her, saying he might cause her more harm than good. Neil had been so angry that he'd sworn never to bring up the topic of their children as it wasn't helping her recovery. He'd made sure he himself avoided hearing about them, but now he seemed to realize something he'd overlooked before. Mia had fallen into a worse state because he told her he hadn't seen their twins. Could it be that she was unhappy about that? Perhaps he should see them and bring them to her. The doctors had advised him to talk to her about things that might interest her more and make her fight for life. He had been a terrible father and husband for the past few months. Liam was right. Mia wouldn't like this. She would never approve of him ignoring their children like they were nothing to him when in truth, they meant the world to him. The breeze continued to blow, carrying with it the scent of blossoming flowers and the bittersweet reminder of all he had missed and was about to lose if he didn't do anything. He should stop this and go see them. Though he told himself that, he was exhausted. He was drained and burned out completely. He closed his eyes, allowing himself a moment of vulnerability, the reality of his situation sinking in. As the silence settled once more, Neil knew that he had a choice to make, a choice that would shape not only his life but that of his children as well. And though the path ahead seemed unpredictable, he could feel the tentative stirrings of resolve within him, urging him to take the first step of being a father. "When are they going to be out of the incubator?" he asked, his eyes still closed. "They are already being taken out of it as we speak," replied Liam. "I want to see them." With that, he straightened up, pushing past the weight of his exhaustion and grief. His children needed him, and Mia would want him to be there for them. It was time to start being the father and husband they all needed. Chapter 257, Meeting the Twins. The three men approached the Neonatal Intensive Care Unit, NICU, the place where the newborns were being cared for. Nurses glanced up from their stations, surprised to see Neil Weiner finally walking towards the NICU after months of avoiding the path and ignoring his children. Almost all the nurses in the hospital knew how much time he spent in the ICU room to even have the time to go to his children, but seeing him now made them all momentarily stop whatever they were doing. His presence, though worn and weary, still commanded attention and respect. He was followed closely by the two men every nurse had come to like and want, James and Liam. The three of them were a picture perfect. All eyes were on them until they disappeared into the NICU. Inside the NICU, the room was softly lit, with rows of incubators lining the walls. Each incubator cradled a tiny life, their monitors beeping rhythmically. While Neil was still persistent in ignoring his children, Liam had taken his godfather duties so seriously he'd made special arrangements for the twins to be kept together in a special, cozy room attached to the NICU, away from the usual hustle of the unit, with two bulky men in black suits standing guard at the entrance. The babies were nestled in bassinets, small and delicate, with a nurse attending to them. As the three men entered the room, the nurse momentarily paused in surprise at the sight of Neil but quickly composed herself and moved aside to give them access to the twins. Neil stared at the bassinet without approaching it, as if scared that he might mess things up when Mia wasn't here. He stood rooted to his spot until Liam gave him an encouraging pat on the shoulder to assure him that they were here with him. He snapped out of it and hesitantly approached the bassinets, his heart pounding with a mix of apprehension and longing. His eyes were fixed on the tiny bundles before him, each no bigger than his forearm. The twins lay peacefully, their fists occasionally rubbing their faces in the manner that only newborns could. He'd never seen newborn babies in his entire adult life until now. His breath caught as he watched them, struck by the realization that these were his children, flesh of his flesh. They were the most adorable human beings he'd ever set eyes on in all of his life, innocent and small. With a trembling hand, he reached out and gently touched the fisted hand of one of the babies. Instantly, the baby grasped his finger, the tiny fingers curling around his much larger one. A soft, reluctant smile tugged at Neil's lips as he marveled at the feeling of connection that surged through him. Warmth and tenderness spread to his heart and made him feel the bond he'd felt with them when they were still in Mia's womb. His children, he thought with pride swelling in his heart, would be protected and loved by him for as long as he lived, and their mother lived. As the baby tightened his tiny fingers around Neil's, he could no longer hold back the urge to hold them. Without hesitation, he bent over and carried each of them on his left and right arm. The baby in his right arm, who had gripped his finger a moment ago, sensing his presence, opened his eyes. They were wide and innocent, a shade of gray similar to Neil's. The baby made a soft gurgling noise, and Neil's heart melted at the sight. "Hey there," Neil whispered softly, his voice cracking with emotion. "You're so small, but you've already got a strong grip, huh?" The baby's tongue peeked out, licking his lips, which made Neil wonder if he was hungry. He glanced at the nurse nearby and asked hesitantly, "Have they been fed yet?" The nurse hesitated, then replied gently, "Not yet. We're waiting for the milk to arrive. Since Mrs. Weiner isn't able to breastfeed right now, we'll be using donor milk." Neil's throat tightened at the mention of another woman's milk feeding his children. It should be his wife's milk they had first, but he knew Mia was in no condition to feed them or herself. However, the thought of them having a donor's milk made his protective instinct kick in. He held the babies closer, his arms wrapping protectively around them. "Is that safe? How do you ensure it's safe for them?" The nurse nodded understandingly. "We have strict procedures in place. The milk is screened and pasteurized to ensure it's safe for premature babies like yours. Many mothers donate milk to help babies in need." Neil was about to argue that he'd like to meet the woman who would donate milk to his children to be sure and on the safe side, but Liam stepped forward and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "They know what they're doing. It's a common practice here. The most important thing is that the babies get the nutrition they need." Neil hesitated for a second, but seeing how the babies were peeking out their tongues, he nodded slowly, deciding to trust the hospital with his children like he trusted them with his wife. He focused his attention back on the tiny babies, brushing his fingers lightly over their tiny heads. "You hear that, little ones? You're going to be just fine," he murmured, his voice filled with tenderness. "Noah and Nolan, once you're well fed, I'll take you to see Mommy. She will be so happy to see you." He smiled for the first time in months since his wife had remained in a coma. He looked back at James and Liam, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Thank you, both of you, for bringing me here. I needed to see them. Would you like to hold them too?" James smiled warmly and shook his head. "You can hold them for now," he said, as he'd been with them longer than Neil had. "They're beautiful. Mia would be proud of you for taking this step." He gave him another firm pat on the shoulder, looking at the adorable, identical twins from his side. Neil nodded, his proud gaze returning to his sons. "I wish she could see them too." Then, as if realizing something, he added, "I will make sure she sees them today. She needs to see them. They might be the last string in pulling her back to us." Though the doctors had warned him that Mia must not fall into such a state where her heart monitor lines would flatten again, and he'd made sure to watch everything he said or did in her presence, he believed taking their children to her wouldn't cause any harm. Chapter 258 Death. As night fell, the sun slipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink before fading to darkness. The moon emerged, casting a silvery glow that illuminated the city and the grounds of Silverbrook Hospital. The hospital's windows shimmered softly, and the surrounding streets were bathed in the gentle light. Inside the hospital, the nurses made arrangements for the Weiner twins to be taken to the ICU to see their mother, as Neil had requested. He wheeled them into the room in neonatal transport incubators. They'd been fed a moment ago and, true to the nurse's words, his children were super active for babies born prematurely. He'd watched them eagerly suck on the rubber nipples used to feed them milk, their tiny fists flying eagerly in the air. He could almost hear them purr in delight as they drank. James and Liam had left him in their room earlier as they had things to attend to, but Neil had stayed there until night, when he could finally take the babies to Mia. She always opened her eyes at the sight of the moon pouring in from the window every night, and he hoped when she did tonight, she would be happy to see their little ones. He knew it, he could feel it. He smiled faintly as he wheeled them inside the ICU, where his men standing protectively at the door bowed down slightly and opened the door for him and the nurse to pass. Just like every night, the glass window curtains were drawn apart for the moonlight to pour in through the glass. The pale moonlight illuminated Mia's face, making her appear even paler than she was. Her eyes were closed, and her breathing was so faint one could hardly see her chest rise and fall unless you looked closely without blinking. Neil had already become accustomed to her state, so he left the incubator with the nurse and approached her first. Mia lay on the bed, her frail form barely a shadow of the vibrant woman she once was. Her cheeks were sunken, her collarbones sharply defined, and her breasts looked almost non-existent for a woman who'd given birth, making Neil doubt she'd have milk for their babies when she recovered. He dismissed the thought and called her name softly, his fingertips brushing her shrunken cheeks with so much care and tenderness it hurt to watch her in that state. "Mia," he whispered, his voice cracking as he caressed her face. "It's me, Neil." Instantly, her eyes flew open, staring at him with the same blankness that always broke his heart. He missed the warmth and love in those eyes. He knew she probably didn't know what she was doing, but he wished he'd see a glimpse of life in them. She stared at him without blinking, and his heart tightened. "Hi, love," he greeted as he leaned down and pressed a feathery kiss on her forehead, but deep down, he was hurting. His heart was wounded by the fact that she couldn't reply to him or show him her real emotions. She could only stare at him. Swallowing past the lump in his throat, he stroked her hair and massaged the bandage around her head where the doctor had done a last-minute surgery a month ago when they discovered a brain disorder that had occurred recently after her brain was forced to regain her past memories that were wiped off by the doctor years ago. It was after the surgery that she fell into a vegetative state. He wished he could help her, or that he had done something to stop all the things she'd been through in her childhood that had led to this. He hadn't been able to help and had worsened her condition when he'd refused to see their children. Still stroking her hair, he looked down at her. "I'm sorry it took me this long to see our babies," he said, forcing a smile despite the pain in his heart. "I was stupid for ignoring their existence, but I'm ready to do right now. Noah and Nolan are the most beautiful beings in the entire world. You should have seen how identical and active they are. They have such fragile fingers that amaze and scare the shit out of me. Noah already knows how to smile." He spoke with such fondness that even the nurse standing at the side couldn't help her tears as she watched him talk to his wife like she could understand. Neil continued, "They look just like you did when you were young, but they have my eyes. They suck the milk like they'd been taught before. I wish you were there to see how Nolan kept gripping my finger. You can tell he is going to be a tough one." As if Mia was listening, her blank eyes slowly began to show emotions. Neil noticed the tear welling in her eyes and broke out in a disbelief-filled laugh. He looked back at the nurse, then at Mia. "Did you see that? Mia is shedding tears. She can hear me." He cupped her cheeks delicately. "Would you like to see the babies?" Though she didn't react to his question, the tears continued to roll down her cheeks. Neil gestured for the nurse to bring the babies forward. He moved back and carefully lifted each baby, one at a time, to show them to her. He angled the first baby in a way that Mia could see his face. The baby, who had been sleeping when he picked him up, woke up and rubbed his fists against his face. Mia's eyes filled with another ball of tears. Neil watched in astonishment as Mia's hand flinched and then moved as if she wanted to reach out to touch the baby but couldn't. He quickly bent down and raised her hand, placing it on the baby, who looked at her without blinking as if he knew who she was. At that moment, her heart monitor began to change, the rhythmic beeping speeding up. Neil's heart slammed against his ribs as he hurriedly jerked the baby back, yelling to the nurse, "Call the doctor." The baby was startled by his alarmed shouting and began to cry. The baby wailed and kicked his fists. Neil quickly moved back, but the other baby also began to cry at the same time. Mia's heart monitor was failing, and her chest was rising in a way that made her seem like she was struggling to breathe, her eyes widening as she stared at the babies and Neil as if trying to tell them something. Neil panicked, anxiety flooding through him as he realized he might have messed things up again by bringing the babies and talking to her about them when all he wanted was to help. The doctors rushed in just as he was placing the baby back in its incubator. He rushed back to Mia's side, but before he could reach her, the male nurses pulled him and dragged him outside. He tried to free himself, but the door was slammed shut, and he hurried to the glass windows that gave him a view of the room and his wife. Inside, he watched as the doctors tried to save her, performing CPR and using a defibrillator to shock her heart back to life. Neil's vision blurred with tears as he watched the scene unfold, his heart breaking anew. He closed his eyes and began to pray, his heart pounding in his chest like it would burst out of his ribs. He began to pray in every language he knew, calling out to any god that might be listening to him and save his wife. His thoughts raced, his desperation palpable. "Please," he whispered in French. "S'il vous plaît, ayudez-la." In Spanish, he pleaded, "Por favor, Dios, salvala." He switched to German, then to the snippets of Italian, Mandarin, and Hindi he knew. Each word was a fragment of his desperate heart, a plea for more time. He'd give anything, he thought desperately, his mind racing, to have just a few more months with her. No, not months. A year. No, that's too little. Half of his life. He'd give half of his life if it meant he could have her for as long as the sun rises and falls. He was willing to stop being a short-tempered bastard. He would never raise his voice at anyone or hit people when annoyed. His emotions churned, a tumult of hope and fear. The buzzing in the hospital hallway grew distant as he focused solely on his prayers. Tears streamed down his face, his breath catching in his throat. He was a man undone, clinging to a thread of hope in a sea of despair. He didn't care how pathetic he looked to his men who were looking at him with pity. He didn't care that he was bargaining with a God he didn't know was listening or was mocking him for the lives he'd taken in the past. His uncle was right. Everyone he cared about always ended up dead, abandoning him. But he didn't want Mia to be just a memory. He didn't want to lose her out of everyone. He had always known he had a curse on him and some bad luck that followed him around and killed every person he cared for. He had known a day would come when he would suffer for the lives he'd taken in the past, but he'd thought being in prison for 5 damned years was enough punishment for his sins. But it seemed that wasn't enough. He was bound to suffer even more. No God would listen to a sinner like him. But for goodness sake, Mia was a lovely woman who deserved better. He would trade his life for hers if he could. He would give his damned life to keep her alive. Please, save her this once, if not for him, then for the children. Please. Finally, after making all his conjoined prayers, he opened his eyes and looked through the window. But his heart seemed to momentarily stop beating at the sight before him. Slowly, shakily, he began to back away in disbelief at what he saw through the glass. The heart monitor lines had stopped, flattening completely. The doctors stood around Mia's bed, their faces masks of resignation. She lay still, pale and lifeless. No, Neil whispered, shaking his head. No, no, no. This can't be happening. This can't be happening. I begged you to save her. He refused to accept it. His legs felt like they might give out as he stood there, disbelief and despair coursing through him. He was too broken to hear whatever the other nurses exiting the ICU were saying, too consumed by despair to hear or feel the mood around him, as all he could see was his wife lying still. He didn't even realize when a doctor approached him until he patted his shoulder in a consoling manner. "We are sorry to," the doctor began, but everything else he said was a blur to Neil. The words faded into the background, drowned out by the roaring silence in his mind. Darkness, cold and chilling, seemed to slowly take over his surroundings. The darkness he had feared. She was the only light in his pale, colorless world. If her heart stopped, his would too. David Weiner had once said, "Your Galvera blood makes you a monster. You cannot love and you cannot be loved. All you'll bring is darkness to this world." That darkness, like the blackest heart of a demon, surfaced within him the moment he stared at Mia's heart monitor fading into a flat line. It was over. Everything was pointless now. His gray eyes turned vicious and frightening, seared by the flames of an unbearable pain in his heart. Destruction rose in him like a tidal wave. But if he could snap out of his despair and listen, he would have heard what the doctor was saying before he acted instinctively and began to destroy whatever he came in contact with. However, whatever the doctor said changed the course of Neil's life completely when he finally registered it in his brain. That day marked a moment no one would ever forget, a day seared into his soul and heart. Chapter 259 At the Old Cabin. In what seemed like the blink of an eye, 3 years slipped away, carried by the gentle yet relentless march of seasons. Spring's delicate blossoms unfurled, quickly replaced by the warm embrace of summer, where the sun cast long, golden rays over fields and shimmering lakes. Autumn arrived in a blaze of color, with leaves swirling in the crisp air, whispering tales of change. Winter followed, draping the world in a silent, snowy blanket under a sky heavy with somber clouds. The seasons cycled seamlessly, one into the next, until, almost unnoticed, 3 years had passed, leaving behind a fabric of moments woven into the ever-changing sky. "Daddy, we want cartoons." Noah Galvera leaned over his father's shoulder, directly into his face, to make his announcement. "Yeah." Nolan nodded in agreement, his gray eyes shimmering with mischief. "We're bored in this silly old place with no phones." "How can you be bored?" Neil glanced across the room at the grandfather clock on the wall. It was barely 10 o'clock in the morning. This had, he grimaced, all the makings of a very long day. How was he supposed to keep these little devils here before the arrangements were over on the other side of the island? How long does it take for a wedding venue to be arranged on a resort island? He'd been here on another part of Puerto Rico Island, in one of the Galvera ancient cabins with his kids since yesterday evening, at his wife's and grandma's request. Nolan and Noah Galvera, he thought grimly, were the most stubborn and disastrous little 3-year-olds he'd ever seen. If they were to be present at the resort island where his wedding ceremony was to take place this evening by sunset, then things were bound to go wrong there, because they would destroy every single thing they touched or came in contact with. His grandma had talked him into bringing them here while the arrangements and the shopping were going on, but he was starting to regret it now. The fact that his wife had not thought of calling him or picking up any of his calls since morning was starting to make his mood grimmer than it was before. For the past 3 years she'd survived that coma. He'd not been separated from her until now. He knew his grandma had purposely sent him here with the kids because she wanted him to follow their tradition of not seeing the bride until the day of the wedding. He'd been against it when she first told him to go stay in a hotel until the day of the wedding so he wouldn't see Mia, but when he refused to follow the damned tradition, she'd said the 2 boys couldn't be in the house while the workers were getting everything ready. She talked his wife into convincing him to take the boys to the family cabin on this part of the island. He should have known something was wrong when Mia refused to make love to him the night before he came here. His grandma had talked her into believing their tradition of the bride and groom not being together or getting intimate before their wedding. She'd taken it so seriously she wasn't even going to pick up any of his calls. Oh, she's definitely going to pay for this on their wedding night, which would be tonight. We want cartoons, the twins chorused, breaking Neil out of his thoughts. Guys, for the last time, there is no television here. You're in an old cabin on an island. Look, Neil stood up and pulled back the homespun curtain on the living room window and pointed outside to the sea. You stand right here and watch, and I'll bet that before too long a shark or a big boat will go right by. We saw a big boat yesterday, and we came here on your big shiny boat that has flat-screen TV, but this silly cabin has none. Nolan reminded him with a frown and a pout on his small lips that reminded Neil so much of his wife when she was little. The more their sons grow, the more their features change into a combination of both their parents. I'd rather see a shark bite off someone's head, Noah grumbled. Or see a zombie rip off someone's throat. I miss watching zombies bite people, don't you? Nolan tumbled on top of his brother and brought him down with a thud as he laughed in victory. Yes, Noah agreed as he turned over and sat on his brother's chest. And people dying. Neil, who was still busy trying to reach his wife, heard what his sons were saying and stopped in surprise. How do you guys know about zombies and people dying? He asked over his shoulder, his voice taking on a note of disapproval. Lily lets us watch it with her whenever she comes over and you and Mom are not around, Noah told his father. Even though Lily had made them promise not to tell anyone she was watching movies like that, and they had promised not to tell, he dared not lie when his mom had taught them never to lie. Furthermore, with that look their father was giving them, Noah dared not lie. For how long have you 2 been watching such movies? Neil frowned and made a mental note to speak with Ms. Emily, his son's nanny, about what she was allowing the children to watch right under her nose when Mia and he were not around. 4 times, Nolan said as he struggled to slip out of his shirt and escape from his brother, rolling over the back of the sofa their great-grandma, Valerie, had personally made herself when she was young, said their father, who had told them all kinds of things about the cabin and the Galvera family yesterday. Noah dove for his twin, who, being a master of evasive action, turned in time to send Nolan crashing into the table and pitching the lamp onto the floor. Neil grimaced at the sound of the ancient lamp breaking onto the floor. His grandma was definitely going to have a mini heart attack once she saw how his sons had almost destroyed everything in the cabin. He considered his roughhousing offspring and figured it would take them another 20 minutes to pretty much destroy all the work it had taken his grandma to keep this ancient cabin in place. There would be hell to pay when she saw how his offspring had destroyed everything. Oh, he could explain a broken lamp, make that 4 broken lamps, he thought as he flinched at the sound coming from their bedroom, but as proud as she had been of the fact that she had gotten rid of the 3 Galvera males to give Mia the time she needed to prepare, she was not likely to have more than 4 lamps worth of forgiveness to spare. A crash from the small dining area raised the ante to 5 lamps and 2 vases. Cursing under his breath, he ran his fingers through his hair in frustration and strode towards the boys. He'd had enough. Boys, get your shoes on, we're taking a walk around the island before your Uncle Liam comes to get us. He caught the little hellions as they tried to flee back down the hallway that led to 2 small bedrooms. "We took a walk yesterday," Nolan protested loudly, trying to struggle out of his father's hold. "Well, we're taking another one today." Neil dumped the squirming bodies onto the sofa. "Get your shoes and your sun hats. Let's move it," he ordered strictly. By God, he had no idea who his offspring took after, because he was sure as hell he wasn't like this as a boy. "We don't want to go for a walk. We want to watch cartoons and play games." Noah folded his arms across his chest and did his best to scowl at his father, who was looking down at them in disbelief. "Yeah." Nolan mimicked his twin brother's stance and facial expression. Both, identical in every way, their voices and everything else. The only way Neil could tell them apart when Mia dressed them in matching outfits was from the dimples. Nolan had dimples while Noah had none. "Tough. We're walking. Get ready." Neil, not to be out-scowled, pointed firmly to the pile of shoes one of his men had brought for the boys this morning on Mia's request inside the back door. Still grumbling, the boys reluctantly did as they were told. "Maybe we'll see a bald eagle," Neil said to encourage them. "I'd rather see a shark," Nolan sulked. "Yeah, or a mermaid." His brother moped along behind him, but Nolan glared at him and said, "Mermaids are for girls. We are men, we want something big and tough. Like whales and wolves, not mermaids. Trust me, fellas," their father told them as he held the back door open. "You don't want to see a wolf or a shark from the wrong side of the window." "We're not scared," Nolan said bravely. "Well, you should be." Neil closed the door behind them. "You wouldn't want to see a wolf on the island." Noah scoffed, "No wolf or shark can harm us when you are here. You will shoot it down with your guns like you shoot bad guys in the military." "Yeah, Miss Cat, our teacher, said our dad is a hero. And our friends also said they want to be like you when they grow up. We can never be harmed when you are there. Right, Noah?" He turned to his twin while holding their father's hand and jumping up and down as they walked at the side of the sea. "Yep, Dad. When are we going back to Bisabuela's? It's not fun here. Mom brought us little suits yesterday morning, and she said we are going to wear them this evening, but here we are taking a boring walk instead of getting ready to wear our new suits." Noah grumbled with a pout. "What's the occasion, Dad? Why was Mom and Aunt Rain shopping so much yesterday? And why is Mom not here with us?" "Mom and I will be getting married this evening," Neil replied, knowing they wouldn't drop the question. They'd been asking him since last night, and he'd avoided it until now. As expected, the two frowned in confusion and looked up at him at the same time. "You mean you two are getting married?" Noah asked, confused. "I thought you were already married to Mom? Why are you having a wedding again?" Nolan asked, not understanding why his parents were having a wedding ceremony when they were already married. Neil sighed softly as his kids kept bombarding him with questions. Yes, they were married, but they hadn't had their wedding ceremony yet because of all the misfortunes that had befallen them. First, it was Mia's coma, then the process of her recovery after she woke up, which took almost a year and a half before she could walk on her own without a wheelchair or his assistance. They'd finally decided to have it this summer because his grandma was persistent about having them visit Puerto Rico. When they arrived, Neil thought it was a perfect opportunity to have their wedding ceremony like Mia had always wanted. But now he was starting to think he'd made a mistake. He hated being away from her for long. He was already missing her so badly that he wished he could just throw caution to the wind and fly back to her. "Dad, answer us. Why are you getting married again?" Noah persisted when Neil didn't reply and was lost in thoughts about his wife. Just when Neil was searching for words to answer, he spotted his driver and Liam making their way toward them, which he believed was a sign that the arrangements were done and he could go back. "Uncle Liam," the boys chorused the moment they spotted him and wiggled their hands away from their father's hold, sprinting toward Liam, who opened his arms for them. "My little boys." He hugged them both at once and picked them up, spinning them around. They giggled happily in his arms as he put them down, making Neil roll his eyes when Liam shot him a look that said, "They like me more than you." "Did you come to take us back?" Noah asked, too excited to see his uncle. He clutched tightly to his pants. When Liam nodded, the boys jumped up and down in excitement. "Have you gotten our suits ready?" Neil asked as he approached his friend, eager and as excited as his kids to finally leave. "Yep, everything is ready. But..." Liam trailed off, hesitant to speak further. "But what?" Neil asked with a frown. "It's about Mia. She's not all right," Liam said, not knowing how to phrase it to his friend what he'd found out when he met her before coming here. "What's wrong with my wife?" All color drained from Neil's face at the thought that something bad had happened again. Chapter 260 Wedding Traditions. Sitting upon a plush, velvet chair, she winced as she felt her hair being tugged from different angles. There were enough makeup kits on the vanity to last a lifetime, or even open a cosmetic store if she wanted to. Their wedding was supposed to be a small island wedding, but her husband had gone all out to make it grand, not only sending invitations to almost everyone he was acquainted with, but also ordering the most expensive, grand wedding gown to be made for her. She wouldn't have minded not wearing makeup, but Rain and Paulina Galvera, Neil's cousin, were hell-bent on making her look like a doll. Women scrambled around the room, all of whom were trying to get her ready on time before the guests and the groom arrived at the venue. Some were pulling at the hem of her gown so the women doing her hair wouldn't step on it. Her white wedding dress was a masterpiece of intricate craftsmanship, billowing out in a voluminous cascade of luxurious fabric, shimmering subtly as if woven from moonlight itself. The bodice, with its sweetheart neckline and delicate lace sleeves, clung to her form with an elegance that evoked the grace of a timeless painting. It emphasized her tiny waist and made her look like an elegant doll who'd never given birth. Her neck was adorned with a glimmering sky-blue diamond necklace Neil had gifted her on their first night on the island, complemented by matching earrings dangling from her ears. She could barely recognize herself in the vanity mirror, which was surrounded by lights that highlighted her face and made her look like an A-list model. She'd give her friends credit, they did her makeup to perfection. Only her hair was left, which was taking forever because they couldn't decide which style looked best on her or which would go better with her makeup and dress. She'd been showered with praises even before she was completely ready by Neil's relatives, who seemed desperate to get on his good side as they had not seen him in ages. She never knew her husband had such a big family in Puerto Rico until the second day of their arrival in the country when the house was filled with people who came to say hi. Even Neil himself had been surprised and annoyed at the same time when the house got filled with faces he'd never known before and people who introduced themselves as his cousins and aunties. All his relatives had brought gifts to Mia and her little boys, who, just like their father, had ignored most of the guests and carried on with their activities. Her life had been going just the way she wanted since the day she'd opened her eyes in that hospital bed and saw Neil holding their children 3 years ago. She fought to live, and she did it. Even though she knew most of the people in this room today were here to get on the infamous Xavier Galvera's good side, she didn't care because they treated her and Neil like family. They made her feel at home and welcomed, especially Neil's grandma, who looked too beautiful and graceful for her age. Mia could never ask for anything more than this. She had 2 handsome, mischievous little boys who made her a proud and happy mom, and a loving and caring husband who never failed to make her smile. Ever since she'd woken up from that coma, Neil had become even more caring and loving, and being away from him for a day was already killing her soul. She missed him and her sons. Last night had been the longest night of her life because of the empty space beside her and the absence of her 2 boys. She couldn't wait to see him again as she had something very important to share with him. However, knowing the family tradition, she'd not returned any of his calls or messages. She'd fought the urge to call him back and slept hugging one of his shirts last night. Now, sitting here getting her hair done, it felt like it was taking forever. Not to mention the uncomfortable gown and the countless women crowding her and pulling her hair in all sorts of directions. "Hand me those pins, Rain. We need to do the hair this way. It looks much better," said Neil's cousin as she added the 100th hairspray to Mia's hair and began to change the style. "But I think this way looks much better," Rain argued as she made little braids and attached some pearls to pack the hair into a bun. But Paulina, whom Mia had come to like and bond with, shook her head in disagreement. She raised her phone and showed Rain the hairstyle she was going for. "I think this will look better on her. Right, Abuela?" She turned to ask her grandmother, who was busy arranging the flower basket for Lily Thompson and Paulina's daughter, Isabella, who would walk Mia down the aisle later. The old woman looked up from where she was sitting with the most enchanting hazel eyes and shiny, wrinkled, tanned skin that glistened under the light. Meeting Mia's gaze in the mirror, she smiled warmly. "Whatever you do will look good on her. Ella es una belleza natural," she complimented in Spanish, looking at Mia like a proud mother. She had liked the young woman the first day her grandson walked her into the Casa de Familia a week ago with 2 handsome sons, whom she'd come to adore despite their disastrous nature, which reminded her of their grandfather at their age. She didn't have to be at the ancient cabin to know that her 2 great-grandsons had made a complete mess of her favorite cabin. Speaking of the two little mischievous boys, their voices rang out from the hallway, alarming all the women in the room. Everyone knew how the two boys could be when around each other. "Mom," they called at the same time, pushing the door open and running in, only to be stopped by their Aunt Rain, who stood in front of them with her arms wide open to stop them from ruining their handiwork on the bride. "Not today, boys. Your mom is not ready yet. Go stay with your father and the groomsmen. This room is for the bride and her bridesmaids. Run along." She playfully shooed them away, but the boys didn't act like they heard or cared about what she was saying. Without giving her time to react, Nolan ducked down and passed through her parted legs to reach his mother, while Noah went around, avoiding her hand and laughing at her failed attempt to stop them from seeing their mother when they hadn't seen her since last night. Mia, who heard her son's voices, immediately stood up from her chair only to be stopped by Paulina, who shook her head. "Those two boys of yours will ruin all our hard work. You can talk to them from this distance." Well, too late. The Galvera twins had already outsmarted all the women trying to stop them. They reached their mother at the same time and were about to throw themselves on her as usual, but stopped in their tracks at the sight of the breathtaking woman in white in front of them. Nolan's eyes widened while Noah's mouth fell open in surprise, both looking exactly like their father at that moment. Before anybody in the room knew it or before the boys could react, the door banged open again. This time, it was the groom who, according to tradition, must not see his wife until they were at the altar, but he didn't seem to give a damn and strode in like the king he was. "Ni hablar, nieto. You can't see the bride now. Go out and stay with your groomsmen," said his grandma, trying to block him from entering. She called the rest of the women in the room and ordered them to push him out and not allow him to reach his bride. A deep, humorous laughter escaped Neil's throat as all the women tried to push him back, but he barely felt their push and stood rooted in place. "Abuela, traditions don't apply to me. Besides, my wife and I are already married with 2 sons. You might as well let me see her now and go away on my own terms." "I will." He trailed off as he looked around the room for his wife but couldn't find her. His stomach twisted as he remembered what Liam had said about Mia not feeling well. He'd rushed here from the cabin with his groomsmen after Liam told him that he'd seen Mia throwing up her guts in a basin when he went looking for her. He'd said she looked so sick and shaky. Neil had not wasted any time returning, but when he arrived, he'd been forced to dress up first before coming here to look for his wife and see what was wrong with her himself. But now that she was not in sight, he began to panic, fearing that the women were hiding his wife because she was indeed sick. He could never overcome his fear of losing her, not when he'd almost lost her 3 years ago in that hospital. He could still remember how he'd momentarily felt himself die internally at the thought that she died and the doctors had failed to save her life. For the past 3 years, he'd made sure she never missed a monthly hospital checkup. "Where is my wife?" he demanded coolly, the humor in his gray eyes dying completely and taking on a dark look that made the women step back immediately. He never joked when it came to his family, especially his wife. Just when he was about to look around himself, his sons ran out from behind a wooden divider in the room and ran to him. "Dad, Mom is hiding right there. She looks so different with a big gown that looks like an angel," Nolan exclaimed while pointing towards the wooden divider. "Let our dad pass," the boys said at the same time when the women moved to stop him again. The twins stood in front of their father, scowling at the women like their father was doing. "Let him in," came Mia's voice as she stepped out from her hiding place. There was no use hiding from her strong-headed husband who would never give up until he saw her. She could already tell why he came here first. Liam must have told him what he saw. At Mia's words, the women moved aside, giving Mia the full view of her husband and sons, standing with the same stance.